Hi everybody, and welcome to another end of week video where we'll be looking at some of the questions that you've asked on the course this week. I'm joined by David, the lead educator, and Karen and Sally. Hi everyone.
Hello everyone.
Hi. Hi.
So David, tell us a little bit about what's been going on this week on the course, some of the topics and the highlights.
Yes. Well, this week we've been looking at accepting job offers, and actually, interestingly enough, at least 2 people on the course this week have mentioned they have managed to accept a job offer, apparently following our advice. So that's great news, and hopefully there'll be more by the end of the course. We've been looking also at rules and regulations at work, and I think most people have very similar rules, though sometimes they're more applied than others, shall we say. We've also had a look at business acronyms, which I think lots of people seem to know lots of those, a lot more than I have ever come across. I try to avoid them, to be honest. And overall, I think a lot of great interaction and also a lot of very interesting stories at the very beginning of the week about first day at work. And I think actually Karen in particular has been enjoying those, as I remember.
I have. I've been enjoying those immensely.
Yes.
It's making me reminds me of my first days at different jobs, and just some excellent descriptive writing.
Any
Yes.
particular ones that stand out that you remember especially, Karen?
Well, quite a lot of them talk about how friendly people have been in first days of work, and how incredibly useful that is. And I think it's a good reminder, for me anyway, for when new people join my workplace, to welcome them and take just a little moment of time to say hello, check everything's okay, because we often forget what it's like to be new.
Okay.
Yes, very true.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started with the questions, because we've got lots of good questions. The first question comes from Eugene Kudria, who says, how should I answer and how shouldn't I answer if I'm asked about expected salary? A few people asked this question, including Margaret N. Yoyita and others. So, David, would you like to kick off with that one? If you're asked about how much you expect to be paid, etc., what's the best answer?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a difficult and often very uncomfortable question for people. I would certainly not enjoy if someone asked me this question as well, so I understand why they're asking this. I think the first thing I would suggest is actually something to do before the interview, because this is a question that can often be asked in an interview. And do some research about what are typical salaries for the post that you're applying. Obviously, it depends where you are and who you know, how easy or difficult this task would be. But having an idea of approximately the range you should be looking at will give you a good start. And then you have to decide where you think is realistic for yourself to go in that range, I suppose. I think realistically, you don't want to put yourself at the bottom because there's nothing to negotiate. You want to put yourself in the middle or maybe towards the top if you've got a lot of experience, and suggest a number and see how they respond. If they go yes straight away, you might think, I pitched it too low, but you can learn that for the next job interview. But I think the other thing is, if you could also say, throw the question back to them and ask them, well, I'd like a salary which is commensurate with my knowledge and experience, and that's what I would expect you to offer. And that kind of forces them to say. They might not want to, of course, so this could become a stalemate if someone doesn't actually mention a number. So a difficult one, but one I think you need to be prepared for.
And we've shared some links on this in previous steps,
Yes.
and we'll link to them again under this video, and some things to help with that. So that's there's some good advice from Monster and from The Balance, which are good sites for job advice like that.
Yeah, I think we've shared a couple of links during the course, but it's worth highlighting again under this video. Yes.
Related to that, before we start talking about starting work, the topic we've been looking at this week, there's a related question which I think is good from Takashi Akutsu. And Takashi asks, I think it would be good to find out as many details as possible about terms and conditions, such as annual leave, allowances, and other benefits before accepting the job. But at the same time, I don't want to leave a negative impression by asking too many detailed questions at the interview. So what's a reasonable way to do this? To try to find out this information, or when should you find out this information, or how, without, as Takashi says, without coming across badly. Karen or Sally, would you like to say something on that?
Go ahead, Sally.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think it's a really good question, and it's something that you do need to know about the job. But perhaps it's a good time to ask is when you've been offered the job. You could ask these kind of questions at the interview. You might want to ask about training and any promotion that's on offer. But when you've been offered the job is possibly a good time to ask about these sort of questions. Or as David mentioned before, when you're doing your research about the job, you could find out then perhaps from other people who work in the company or people who've got similar posts.
David, Karen, anything to add?
Well, quite often organizations, especially bigger ones, maybe not quite so much for smaller ones, will have a document of all the terms and conditions of service, TACOs, as they're sometimes known as, which has all the small details of, sick pay and benefits and all the terms and conditions. And these you can ask for when you've been offered the job. And there's a period of time between being offered the job and accepting, where you can start to look at some of those details.
And as you say, it really depends on the company or organization, because companies with a very good job description, for example, will often include that as well when they send that out to you before the interview. So, but then other companies may have absolutely nothing on paper. So yeah, it's just one of those things. Okay, let's move on to another question. Let's move on to a question related to actually starting work now. And this question comes from Nidaye Tierno, who's saying, if most of the staff are foreigners for the new worker, and Nidaye goes on to say, if most of them are native English speakers, for example, but so if most of the staff are foreigners for the new worker, how can you start talking and be comfortable talking in the workspace with them? If you're in a country where English is perhaps not the first language, but it is the official language of the company, for example, I think is what Nidaye is talking about there. Who would like to take that one?
Well, I can talk a little bit about this if you like, because this is often my situation at work, because I live in Barcelona, where we have two languages. We've got Spanish and Catalan, but also where I work, English is the spoken language. So in different situations, you need to use different languages, and you kind of need to know which one to use. But I think when you start a job, you can, if you listen to which language people are using, and also you could ask somebody, but maybe just somebody that you get to know on the first day. Or you might find that you're using one language in the actual work environment, and then you're using another language by the coffee machine or something like that. And obviously, you have to be sensitive to which language you need to use. But I would listen and ask somebody, and you can, if you join a conversation, you can always ask, which language are we speaking? Maybe in the official language first, and then see what happens. And David? Smile at people. They'll be nice to you.
Yes.
Hopefully, yes. David, anything to add there?
Yes. Well, if they're specifically thinking about when they know the language is English, I presume, well, if they're on our course, we're going to think. In that situation, I think as well, there are lots of fixed expressions you can use and learn to get you started in conversation. They're starting from very obvious and basic ones like hello, introduce yourself, say, maybe explain who you are, what your job is, why you are there. They will probably do the same to you. If the company has a good induction program, they will probably actually have someone who takes you and introduces you to key workers, and that will give you a very good start as well. And connected to what Sally was saying about listening to people, that's also a very good way of finding out how to start and communicate with your colleagues. Because you can see the kind of interaction that they have with each other. What do they talk about? Is it a very quiet office where people kind of keep to themselves and get on with the work, or do they chat a lot? Or, is there a kitchen or a cafe area or somewhere where people can go and converse, and that's where they do the chatting? And so keep your eyes open, be alert, listen, and I think that will help you a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. I'm going to move to just very quickly, I'm going to move to the opposite end of the employment cycle, if you will, here, for a question from Kanata-san S, who's saying, who asks, what does the word notice period mean? And Roger Remy, who asks, can someone explain to me the expression hand in your notice? So this is if things have not gone so well in your job.
Yes.
Or maybe things have gone very well and you've got a better job.
There we go. The more optimistic spin on it.
Yes.
Yes. So who would like to say a little bit about this?
Well, I've done this one-way round. So in 2008, I handed in my notice. So that meant that I gave the organization a month to say, I'm going to leave in 1 month. And they said, oh, terribly sorry. Okay. In a nutshell. So that's one way. You tell the organization that you want to leave and you give them a certain amount of time. That's to hand in your notice. If the organization doesn't want you, then they give you notice and they tell you to leave in a certain amount of time. But each organization is different, so it can vary. But the main thing is that there's a legal amount of time. You can't just not turn up to work the next day, or the organization can't turn around one day and say, that's it, don't come back.
Yeah, it varies from country to country and from type of contract to type of contract, what the notice period would be. It could be as little as 7 days. It could be as much as 3 months. I think there are actually some senior positions where it can be as much as 6 months. But yeah, it will be something that, again, will be in your terms and conditions or your employment contract for that. So. Okay, let's move on. We have lots more questions. Not so many questions about starting work, but lots of questions about interviews. So let's deal with some of those. Nihara Hassan asked the question, some organizations ask interview questions where you have to talk through actual work experience by giving examples. And we spoke about this in the previous step to talk about this. And Nihara's saying, if we get nervous at the interview, we might forget the good examples for this to describe. What can we do about this? What should we do in these situations? David?
Well, I think the first thing is that most companies would allow you to have some notes with you. And I think, in fact, I'd be surprised if they didn't. And I think this is one example where having notes with you is very useful. If you have, it doesn't have to be a lot, but just a list of your examples in this case, and maybe 2 or 3 keywords to remember to say on the topic. And I think that can relax you, because you don't have to rely on memory 100%. You can, I think in a good interview, if you ask for a moment just to check your notes, that nobody will be critical of you for this. They will accept it. And if you just quickly look at your notes and find, okay, this was the example I wanted. And I think the other part of this is, in most cases, very precise details that you might forget are probably not that important. If, for example, you want to give evidence that, I don't know, sales figures went up, but you can't remember if it was 72% or 27% or whatever, it's enough that you say they went up. And I think if they really care, they can ask you that. So, don't worry if you forget very precise things, as long as your story is a good story.
And I think, as you said earlier about preparation and practice, this is something that you can prepare and practice a lot.
Yes.
Because in a good interview, the interviewer will base the questions on the job description and the things that they've asked for and that they've told you they're looking for in a candidate. So, you may have to prepare more. Let's say you prepare 5 or 6 and they ask 3 questions. but you can think about the things that go with that, and rehearse, practice, even record yourself talking about these things, do all of these things.
And I think in one of I know that there's been some questions around interviews and some of these types of interviews where you're asked to give real examples. The important part of the example is what happened, and what you did, and make that thing happen. And it can be quite uncomfortable sometimes to talk about, oh, I did this and I'm amazing at this. Yeah.
I am actually...
totally. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, Sally, on you go.
No, I was just going to say how I totally agree with what Karen's just said. I think it is really hard to sell yourself in this way, and so I think it's really good to practice so that you you know what it feels like to say that. You don't feel quite so self-conscious talking about it. Exactly. And also, I think one idea is you have to talk about something you've done at work to explain your skills and your experience. And I think it's quite a good idea to focus on like one project and talk. You can talk about the different aspects of that project. So you could talk about maybe the way you organise something and the results, etc., the way you dealt with people, rather than trying to think of 10 different things that you did. If you focus on one thing, then you're more likely to remember it, and you'll have your notes as well. But
yes. I was just going to say, I must admit, I am actually a big fan of the STAR system that we spoke about earlier in the course. I find it really does help, not as some kind of very strict, step-by-step way, but it really helps you to organize your thoughts when you do just go through that process of thinking, what was the situation, what did I have to do, what did I do, what was the result. It just makes it very clear, and for an interviewer as well, and it's something that you can really practice with then, and really kind of see if there's something missing. Like if you're missing the part that Sally just mentioned there, if you're missing a part about what did I actually do, what did I achieve, it can really help.
Yes, because I think there is a great danger in interviews that people, when they talk about the situation, like you're saying, Neil, that they get very focused on what happened in the company, what did their colleagues do, because actually, normally, team working is a good thing. But in an interview, you may need to mention briefly what your colleagues did, but we can't say it enough. Focus, track, and make yourself learn to do this, as we said in practice. Talk about what you actually did in that situation.
Yeah,
and
it's
make
more
sure
about me than your usual kind of talk.
Yes.
I think, and you need to make sure that you choose some really good examples as well that had a really good result. Not necessarily. Sorry, I was going to say sometimes the example for the situation that makes the company look good is not necessarily the one that makes you look the best. So that's something to think about, because it's easy to pick on something where there was a big success in getting a contract or something. But if you personally didn't do much, then it's better to talk about a smaller success where you were the key player, shall we say? Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to a very interesting question from Ekaterina Brucker, who asks, when applying for a job in the UK, do you think native speakers have a better chance of getting the job than someone whose native language is not English? Karen, what would you like to say about this?
Well, in the UK, there's quite a lot of laws around equality and discrimination in terms of job applications and in the workplace. So technically, the job, it should not make any difference where you're from. However, if the job requires a certain level of English or a certain legality, like a work permit or residency or a particular qualification, then that may affect whether somebody from the UK has preference over somebody who's from outside the UK. But in terms of language, it should be the same.
Yes, I think David, I think that's true. I mean, you might feel the slight disadvantage culturally because you don't know perhaps some norms. I think what you have to do in that case is find examples, good examples where actually your different nationality could actually be an advantage. So you've got language knowledge of English, but you've also perhaps lots of the customers come from a country whose language you speak. So that could be an advantage. In the hotel trade, for example, it could be a very big advantage to speak other languages.
And I think unless the job is specifically using English as a native speaker, you know, if like as an English teacher, for example, unless yes, exactly, a proficient speaker, unless that is the kind of language level you need. It's communication, isn't it? It's the main thing. So if you can show that you can communicate well, I think that's going to be very, very helpful.
Okay, and we have one final question coming up now from Carlos Smisalato. And this is a more general question, a skills-based question, rather than one specifically about work. Carlos is saying, my biggest difficulty is listening. I can read well and can express my thoughts okay in normal conversation, but I need the other person to talk very slowly. Sometimes I understand just some words in a phrase and I need to train more, so I listen to podcasts, news, etc. What else should I do? So I think this is a general question open to everyone. Tips on improving listening skills for Carlos and I'm sure many others who want to do this. Who would like to kick off?
Me.
Well, it sounds like it. Okay, go for it, Karen.
I think one of the things to do if you are choosing things to listen to is find something at your level. So quite often people will make the mistake of trying to rush the levels and go, oh, I'll just jump to the advanced level of listening and listen to something an hour long at a very high level on a complicated topic and struggle. So taking it down to shorter 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even 1 minute BBC News and slowly working up that way can help with confidence, which is a big important element of not panicking, and that will help you to hear better.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like Carlos is doing the right thing anyway, listening to podcasts at the moment. But there's, as Karen was saying before, if you want to choose something that's at your level, I think is it on the Learn English Teens website that we've got some listening activities for different levels. We've got the skills activities for different levels, aren't there? I think listening's included there as well. So
at 5 levels from like elementary up to advanced, so it covers everything.
Yeah. So that would be a good place to start. You can choose your level there.
I think in an interview, another aspect is if you know what the interviewer is going to say and what types of questions they're going to ask, then even if you miss a few of the words, you know what that question is. So if the interviewer is asking, you know that they're going to ask you something about what you can bring to the job, and you hear bring and job, you know, oh, that's the question about what am I going to bring. So
no, I think that's a really good point, Karen, because I think that is one of the things that when people say I'm not very good at listening, what they mean is I don't hear every single word. But actually, very often the skill of listening is, well, what words do you hear and what is the likely sentence in the situation? And that's your example just now about the job interview, I think is a very good one. And people should, that's a positive thing if you can do that. That's not a problem.
I think another thing that you can do just to check that you've understood is to summarize what you think you've heard to make sure, and you know, if rather than saying could you repeat that all the time, if you summarize what the interviewer's just asked you, so you've just said and then you know whatever the information was, just to check. That might be helpful.
If you mean X, then I will tell you why.
Yes.
One thing I would say,
and if they meant Z, never mind, because you've already said what you're answering.
Yeah.
One thing I would say possibly is that listening to news and podcasts and stuff is great and it's very, very useful. But if you're trying to build your listening for the workplace, and let's say you're dealing with English speakers from different nationalities and different parts of the UK or the US or Australia, and you know, different types of conversation, that maybe you should try to listen to examples of everyday conversation like that. And I think, you know, maybe things like, you know, I hate to say it, but things like soap operas or like, you know, EastEnders, or but you know, the type of thing where, or any kind of chat shows or talk radio, or you know, where people phone in, and things like that, where you've got real people talking about everyday stuff instead of because news can tend to be quite normal and structured and well written. And
well, I think you can do the two, because a lot of things like talk radio, for example, they also have podcasts where they have highlights of the program, and then you can take the highlights program on the podcast, which then has the advantage you can also pause it, you can listen to it again for bits you really didn't get, or a key word or phrase you want to write down. And you don't have to listen to the whole thing, you know, for an hour. You can do, like Karen was suggesting, 5 minutes. Well, you don't have to listen to the whole podcast in one go. You can listen 5 minutes, have a rest, do something else, come back to the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Podcasts are great, but yeah, I just say, you know, to Carlos, maybe as you just said there, think about the ones you're choosing as well. So maybe not only kind of scripted or factually written ones, but ones that are a bit more. Because, you know, listen to us. Are we speaking grammatically and logically and coherently?
We are a fantastic example of spoken English, Neil. I'm not sure what you're saying there.
Yes.
Well, actually, YouTube's good for that as well. Because there are lots of people who have like sort of video casts. Is that what we call them? Instead of podcasts? I've forgotten.
Good question. Something like that.
If anyone knows the answer, please write it under the video.
Didn't it used to be vodcast? But I think that's kind of fallen out of. I think that's fallen out of fashion as well. Vlogs as well.
That's the word.
That's also a bit old, a bit dated now.
Is it?
Are you sure?
I'm
we use that.
These things moves.
Takes time for those words to move across Europe to people like us.
Oh, and I'm on the edge of the world, so it's going to take another time.
Yeah, but yeah. So basically, so practice, short things. Choose things at your level, like you said. Choose podcasts that are interesting for you. Don't feel you have to do too much. 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes at a time is better than 60 minutes of I don't understand. Okay.
I think when you're actually in the interview, well, if the interviewer is talking and explaining something, and you realise that you've actually got no idea what they're talking about, you could I mean that's probably not going to happen, but just in case, you know, remember that you can interrupt and say, could you repeat that again, please? Or rather than wait until they've finished and then you don't know what to say, better to interrupt and get them to repeat, I think.
But I think this doesn't just apply to interviews. It also applies to what we're talking about this week about, you know, your first few days in a job. You know, you've had the interview and that's gone fine. Suddenly you find yourself in an open plan office with 50 people from 4 different countries, and you know, it can be scary.
Yeah, it can.
Okay, that's all the questions.
We've all done that. Yes.
Yes.
You can tell from the expressions and the silence.
So that's all the questions we've got time for in this. So thank you for all your answers, and I hope everyone that's watching enjoyed the video and got a lot out of it. And of course, as I said at the beginning, we'll share links under this with extra resources to help you. Okay, so bye everyone.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week on the course.
Bye. See you next week.